I stood in the doorway of my childhood bedroom, staring at the text message that had just lit up my phone screen. Unknown number. We know what you're planning, Ellie. Come back home and we'll forget this ever happened. Or everyone will know what you really are. My hands trembled as I read it again, the words blurring through tears I refused to let fall. After everything I had survived, after finally building a life away from them, Vivian and Richard still thought they could control me. But this time, I wasn't the scared 19-year-old girl they had broken. This time, I had evidence, allies, and most importantly, I had found my voice. If you've ever felt trapped by people who were supposed to love you, if you've ever wondered when enough is finally enough, stay with me through this story. Hit that like button and subscribe, because what I'm about to share might just save someone else from the hell I lived through. Drop a comment below if you've ever had to choose between your sanity and your family. I promise I read every single one. Let me take you back to where it all started, to the day I finally saw my reflection and liked what I saw, and to the moment that illusion shattered into 1,000 pieces. I was 19 years old when I first wore my mother's lavender dress. I say mother, but Vivian had never felt like one. Not really. She married my father Richard when I was 7, and from that moment on, I became invisible in my own home, a ghost child who existed only to serve. The transformation hadn't been immediate though, and that's what made it so insidious. For the first 3 months after the wedding, Vivian had been everything a grieving 7-year-old could have hoped for. She braided my hair before school, packed lunches with little notes inside, and read bedtime stories in different voices that made me laugh until my stomach hurt. I remember thinking my real mother had sent her to me, an angel to fill the hole her death had left. The first crack appeared the day the adoption papers were finalized. I came home from school to find Vivian sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of wine, still wearing her courtroom clothes. The smile she gave me was different, sharper somehow, like a mask that no longer fit quite right. "Well," she said, swirling the wine in her glass, "that's done. You're officially mine now." The way she said mine made my skin prickle, but I was 7. I didn't have the words for why it felt wrong. The changes came gradually enough that I kept making excuses for them. Vivian stopped braiding my hair, said I was old enough to do it myself, even though my fingers couldn't quite manage the plaits she had made look so easy. The lunch notes disappeared, replaced by plain sandwiches that got progressively smaller. Richard, who had been distant but kind in those first months, began leaving the room whenever I entered. I told myself they were just busy, that this was normal, that all families went through adjustment periods. By the time I turned 8, I was doing my own laundry because Vivian said she had too much on her plate. At 9, I was responsible for cleaning the bathrooms every Saturday while they played tennis at the country club. At 10, I was cooking dinner 3 nights a week, following recipes from a stained cookbook, terrified I would mess up and see that look of disgust cross Vivian's face. The look that said I was a burden, an obligation, something to be endured rather than loved. But on that particular Tuesday afternoon when I was 19, with both of them supposedly out at some charity luncheon 3 towns over, I had slipped into their master bedroom, drawn by the scent of that expensive French perfume Vivian wore, the one that came in the crystal bottle shaped like a flower. I had been cleaning their room, a task that took me 2 hours every week because Vivian inspected it with white glove precision, and the bottle caught the afternoon light in a way that made it look magical. I had picked it up, felt the weight of it, and wondered what it would be like to smell that expensive, to move through the world leaving that trail of elegance behind me. The dress hung in her walk-in closet, tags still attached, probably forgotten among the dozens of other designer pieces she bought and never wore. Vivian went shopping the way some people went to therapy, coming home with bags and bags of clothes she would wear once or not at all. I had found the dress while putting away her dry cleaning, another of my endless tasks. The fabric was soft as water between my fingers, a delicate lavender silk that caught the light and seemed to shimmer with its own inner glow. The color reminded me of the flowers my real mother had planted in our old garden, the one we had to leave when she died and Richard sold our house. I had never owned anything so beautiful. My closet held nameless cousins' hand-me-downs and clearance rack scraps Vivian deemed acceptable for the help, because that's what I was, not a daughter, just free labor with nowhere else to go. I knew I shouldn't try it on. Every instinct screamed at me to put it back and finish cleaning. But a buried part of me whispered that I deserved to feel pretty just once, to remember what it felt like to be a girl instead of a servant. The silk slid over my skin like cool water as I pulled it on, my heart hammering. Everything I owned was rough cotton or scratchy polyester, fabrics built to survive endless loads of laundry. This was different. This was what it felt like to be Vivian. To move through the world wrapped in luxury, never doubting you deserved it. I turned to the mirror and barely recognized myself. The girl staring back had color in her cheeks, shoulders that didn't hunch with shame, eyes that sparkled with something I'd forgotten existed. Hope, maybe. The dress fit perfectly, which made it worse. Vivian and I were the same size. There was no reason I couldn't wear beautiful things except that she had decided I didn't deserve them. I was twirling slowly, watching the skirt fan out around me like I was in some fairy tale, when I heard the footsteps. Heavy ones that could only be Richard, followed by the sharp click of Vivian's heels on the hardwood floor. My blood turned to ice. They weren't supposed to be home for another 3 hours. The luncheon was 40 minutes away. But then I heard Vivian's voice, angry and getting closer, and I realized the luncheon must have been canceled, or they had left early, or maybe the universe had simply decided that this one moment of happiness was too much for someone like me to have. The bedroom door slammed open so hard it bounced off the wall, leaving a dent I would later be blamed for and forced to repair. Vivian stood there, her face twisted with rage and something else, something uglier. Jealousy. I had never seen it so clearly before, but in that moment, with me wearing her dress and actually looking like I belonged in it, looking younger and fresher than she did despite all her expensive treatments, I saw the truth written all over her surgically enhanced features. She hated me because I was young and she was fighting age with every Botox injection and chemical peel money could buy. She hated me because Richard's first wife, my real mother, had been beautiful without trying, and I looked like her. She hated me because my existence reminded her that she was the second choice, the replacement, the consolation prize. She crossed the room in 4 strides and grabbed my wrist so hard bones ground together. No words, just her fingers digging in, leaving purple prints I'd hide for 2 weeks. She dragged me to her vanity while I stumbled behind, apologizing uselessly. "I'm sorry. I'll take it off. Please, Vivian. I'm so sorry." She shoved me onto the velvet bench hard enough that my teeth clacked. I tasted blood. I thought she was reaching for her hairbrush, the wooden one she'd used on me before when no one was watching. Instead, her hand closed around the crystal perfume bottle. I watched in horror as she uncapped it with shaking hands, her face so red I thought she might have a stroke right there. She upended the entire thing onto the dress, drenching the silk in $300 perfume. The scent overwhelmed me instantly, cloying and sickly sweet, nothing like it smelled when she wore it. It smelled like destruction, like violence given form. The silk darkened where the liquid hit it, spreading out in ugly stains that I knew would never come out. But she wasn't satisfied with that. Vivian grabbed the neckline of the dress with both hands, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the delicate fabric, and ripped. The sound filled the room like a scream, like something dying. The dress came apart in jagged pieces, silk threads separating under her hands, the seams giving way with small popping sounds. She was making this horrible noise in the back of her throat, half sob and half snarl, and I realized she was crying, that there were tears streaming down her face as she destroyed this expensive thing she had never even worn. "You don't ever get to wear my things, you little bitch," she snarled, her voice low and venomous, vibrating with a hatred I didn't know one person could feel for another. "Do you understand me? You're nothing. You own nothing. Everything you have, every piece of food you eat, every breath of air you take in this house, is because Richard and I allow it. Because we're generous enough to keep you here when we could have thrown you into foster care the second your pathetic mother died." The words hit me like physical blows. I sat there frozen, feeling the cold perfume soak through to my skin, burning slightly where it touched the sensitive areas on my neck and chest, watching pieces of the dress fall around me like lavender snow. I couldn't even cry yet. The shock was too complete, too overwhelming. My mind had simply shut down, unable to process the level of venom being directed at me. Then I heard Richard's voice from the doorway, and it broke something inside me that had been cracking for years. "Looks like the kid wanted to play dress-up," he said with a laugh that had no humor in it, only cruelty, only satisfaction at seeing me humiliated. "Vivian, don't go easy on her. She needs to learn her place. I've been telling you for years you're too soft on her." Too soft. I cleaned their house. I cooked their meals. I did their laundry. I had given up any chance at a normal teenage life because I was too busy serving them. And he thought Vivian was too soft on me. The absurdity of it would have been funny if it wasn't so devastating. That's when Vivian grabbed what was left of the ruined dress and threw it in my face. The wet fabric hit me like a slap, cold and reeking of that perfume, and I finally started to cry. Not the pretty kind of crying you see in movies, but ugly, gasping sobs that shook my whole body. "Clean up this mess," Richard added, his words clipped and cold, dismissive. "And don't let us catch you in here again, you worthless little thing. I should have listened to my brother and put you in a group home when I had the chance. At least then you'd have learned some gratitude." I grabbed the torn pieces of dress with trembling hands and ran, not to my room but to the bathroom at the end of the hall, the guest one that nobody used. I locked the door and slid down to the tile floor, finally letting the sobs come in full force. They racked my whole body, violent and ugly, the kind of crying that makes you feel like you're drowning, like you might never be able to breathe normally again. I looked at myself in the mirror across from me, mascara I had borrowed from Vivian's collection, streaking down my face in black rivers, perfume making my eyes water and burn, and I didn't see the girl who had felt pretty just 15 minutes ago. I saw a weak, pathetic creature who let people walk all over her again and never fought back. I saw someone so desperate for love that she had spent 12 years trying to earn it from people who were never going to give it. I saw my mother's daughter, and I felt shame that she had raised someone so spineless, so willing to accept crumbs and call it a meal. That's when the memories started flooding back. Not gentle reminiscence, but violent flashbacks that made me press my hands over my ears like I could block them out. I was 10 years old again, scrubbing toilets with cleaning products so harsh they made my hands crack and bleed. Richard stood over me, criticizing every streak I missed, every spot I didn't get quite clean enough. "Your mother was actually good at keeping a house," he said, his voice flat and matter-of-fact, like he was discussing the weather. "She took pride in it, but I guess you didn't inherit any of her useful qualities. You're lucky I'm even willing to keep you around." Lucky. As if I should be grateful to clean up after the man who had married my mother and then couldn't be bothered to pretend to love her daughter after she was gone. My real mother had been dead for 3 years by that point, and I barely remembered her face anymore. I had one photo of her that I kept hidden under my mattress, afraid Vivian would find it and destroy it out of spite. In it, my mother was laughing, her head thrown back, her hair catching the sunlight. She looked so alive, so full of joy. I couldn't reconcile that image with the cancer that had eaten her from the inside out, that had turned her into a skeleton covered in papery skin before she finally slipped away. Richard remarried fast, within 8 months of Mom's funeral. People had whispered about it at the wedding, but he didn't care. He wanted a mother for me, he told anyone who asked, someone to provide stability and structure. What he really wanted was someone to take over the household duties my mother had performed, someone to look good on his arm at business dinners, someone young and attractive enough to make his colleagues envious. Vivian had been all those things. She had been so sweet at first, so kind and motherly, right up until the adoption papers were signed. I remember the hearing, sitting in that courtroom with the judge asking me if I wanted Vivian to be my legal mother. I had said yes. I had smiled and said yes because Vivian was squeezing my hand and she had promised me we would be a real family, that she would love me like I was her own. The judge signed the papers, everyone shook hands, and we went out for ice cream to celebrate. That was the last time Vivian bought me anything without complaining about the cost. The mask came off gradually, but by the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. I was legally hers. She could do whatever she wanted with me short of outright abuse that left visible marks, and she was careful about that. Everything she did was calculated, designed to break me down mentally and emotionally, while leaving no evidence that anyone would believe. I remembered being 12 and finding Vivian's makeup bag left out on the bathroom counter. I had just wanted to try, wanted to see if I could make myself look older, prettier, less like the ugly duckling everyone at school said I was. I had been particularly brutal that week. Someone had started a rumor that I had lice, which wasn't true, but it spread like wildfire. Kids avoided me in the halls. No one would sit with me at lunch. When I got home, I thought maybe if I could make myself look different, prettier, more like the popular girls, things would change. Vivian found me with her lipstick halfway to my mouth, my hands shaking as I tried to apply it the way I had seen her do it 1,000 times. She didn't yell. That would have been kinder. Instead, she laughed. This horrible, high-pitched laugh that still echoed in my nightmares, that woke me up sometimes in the middle of the night. "That face?" she had said, gesturing at me like I was something rotting, something offensive just to look at. "Makeup can't fix that, honey. You'd just be putting lipstick on a pig. Trust me, I'm doing you a favor by telling you the truth. Some girls are pretty, and some girls need to focus on being useful. Guess which category you fall into. I had locked myself in my room that night and cried until I threw up. The next day at school, when someone made a comment about my appearance, I didn't cry. I had already learned that lesson. Some people are pretty and some people are useful, and I was firmly in the second category. It would be 7 years before I looked at myself in a mirror and saw anything other than someone who needed to be useful to justify their existence. They had isolated me so carefully over the years. When my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, tried to visit after the first year of the marriage, Vivian told her I didn't want to see her, that I blamed her for not taking me in after Mom died. It wasn't true. I had never blamed Aunt Carol for anything, but by the time I found out about the lies years later, Aunt Carol had stopped trying. She thought I hated her. She thought I had chosen Richard and Vivian over her. The truth was more complicated. Aunt Carol had been going through a terrible divorce when my mother died. Her husband had cleaned out their bank accounts and left her with 2 kids under 5 and a mountain of debt. She had wanted to take me in, had begged Richard to let her, but he had convinced her I would be better off with him. He had money, stability, a big house and a good school district. Aunt Carol could barely afford to feed her own children. What could she offer me except poverty and stress? So she had stepped back, telling herself it was for my own good, that I would be better off with Richard even if it broke her heart. And Vivian had taken that sacrifice and twisted it into a weapon, telling Aunt Carol over the phone that I had said horrible things about her, that I called her a coward for abandoning me, that I never wanted to see her again. Aunt Carol, already drowning in guilt, believed it. She stopped calling. She stopped sending birthday cards. She disappeared from my life completely, and I didn't know why until much later. Vivian and Richard told everyone who would listen that I was a troubled child, a liar, someone seeking attention. They poisoned every relationship I might have had until I was completely alone with them. My teachers heard I was difficult. My classmates heard I was weird. The few family members who tried to reach out were told politely but firmly that contact would only upset me, that I was working through my grief with a therapist and needed space. There was no therapist. There was just me, isolated and alone, with 2 people who saw me as a burden at best and an object to abuse at worst. Sitting on that bathroom floor, covered in perfume and shame, feeling the silk of the ruined dress sticking to my skin, I made a decision. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, more like a truth that had been building for years, finally crystallizing into words I could no longer ignore. I couldn't stay. If I stayed, they would kill me, maybe not physically, but they would kill every part of me that still wanted to live, to be happy, to be seen as human. They would grind me down until there was nothing left but a hollow shell that cleaned their house and cooked their meals, and never dared to want anything more. I had to leave. The thought terrified me. I had no money, no job skills, no friends, nowhere to go. They had made sure of that, but staying terrified me more. Staying meant accepting that this was all I deserved, that Vivian was right, that I was worthless and should be grateful for the scraps they threw me. And some small part of me, some stubborn fragment of my mother's daughter, refused to believe that. That night, after they went to bed, after I heard Richard snoring through the walls and saw the light go off under their door, I started packing. I moved as quietly as I could, every creak of the floorboards making my heart race. I packed a backpack with everything that mattered to me, which wasn't much. Some clothes, my mother's wedding ring that I had hidden from Vivian in a tampon box because I knew she would never look there. The few dollars I had saved from the allowance they gave me for completing my endless list of chores, and a photo of my mom holding me as a baby, both of us laughing at something outside the frame. I stood in my room for a long moment, looking at the space that had never really felt like mine. The walls were bare because Vivian said posters were tacky. The furniture was mismatched, hand-me-downs because I didn't deserve new things. There was nothing here worth keeping except my memories, and most of those I wanted to forget. I wrote a note on a piece of notebook paper, my hand shaking so badly the letters came out messy and uneven. I'm leaving. Don't look for me. I won't come back. I thought about writing more, about trying to explain or justify or plead my case one final time. But what was the point? They had never listened before. They weren't going to start now. I left it on the kitchen table, propped up against the fruit bowl that Vivian kept filled with fake fruit because real fruit required maintenance. Then I walked out the front door at 4 a.m. while they slept, pulling it closed behind me as quietly as I could. I was terrified. I had no plan, no place to go, no idea what I was doing. But I knew staying would destroy me completely. And some survival instinct I didn't know I still had pushed me forward, one foot in front of the other, down the driveway and onto the dark street. I walked to the bus station, jumping at every car that passed, convinced somehow that Richard and Vivian would know I had left, that they would chase me down and drag me back. But no one came. The streets were empty except for a few delivery trucks, and one homeless man sleeping under a bridge who didn't even look up as I passed. I bought a ticket to Riverside, the next town over, with most of my savings. It was only 30 miles away, but it felt like crossing into another world, another life, another chance. The bus was nearly empty at that hour, just me and an elderly woman who smiled kindly at me before falling asleep against the window. I sat in the back, clutching my backpack to my chest like a shield, watching the lights of my hometown disappear behind us. I didn't cry. I had cried enough. Instead, I felt something strange and unfamiliar, something it took me a moment to identify: relief. For the first time in 12 years, I was going somewhere they couldn't follow, couldn't control, couldn't hurt me. I was free. The next morning, Vivian found my note. I know because she called my phone 17 times in the span of 2 hours, leaving increasingly angry voicemails. The first few were saccharine sweet, poison, dressed up as concern. "Ellie, honey, where are you? We're worried sick. Please come home and we can talk about what happened yesterday. I'm sorry I got so upset. Just come home." But her voice had an edge to it, a barely concealed rage that made it clear she wasn't sorry about anything except that I had dared to leave. By the 10th voicemail, the mask was completely off. "You ungrateful little brat. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? Running away like some juvenile delinquent? When you come crawling back, and you will, don't expect us to welcome you with open arms." Her voice was shrill, almost unhinged, and I could hear Richard in the background telling her to calm down. Richard called twice, his messages short and cold and controlled. "If you want to throw away everything we've given you, fine. You'll come crawling back within a week when you realize how good you had it here. But don't expect your room to be waiting for you. I'm done wasting resources on someone who can't even show basic gratitude." The casualness of his dismissal hurt more than Vivian's rage. He had already written me off, already decided I wasn't worth the effort of bringing back. Then Vivian sent one last text, the one that told me everything I needed to know about how they really felt. "Good riddance. We're better off without you anyway. Don't bother coming back." After that, silence. They didn't report me missing. They didn't file a police report. They just let me go. And I realized with a strange mix of relief and devastation that they were probably happy I had left. I had been a burden, an obligation, a reminder of Richard's first marriage. Now they could pretend I had never existed. I rented a tiny room above a laundromat with the last of my money, the kind of place where the walls were thin enough to hear every argument and the shower only had 2 temperatures, freezing and scalding. The room had a hot plate, a mini fridge, and a mattress on the floor that smelled faintly of cigarette smoke from previous tenants. The window looked out onto an alley where cats fought over garbage at night. It was the most depressing place I had ever seen, and it was mine. For the first time in my life, I had a space that was mine, where no one could tell me what to do or criticize how I kept it. I applied everywhere that would take someone with no experience and no references. Fast food places, retail stores, gas stations, anywhere with a help wanted sign in the window. Most places took one look at me, 19 years old with no work history and no permanent address, and sent me on my way. I was starting to panic, watching my money dwindle to nothing, when I walked into a small coffee shop called The Daily Grind. The owner, a tired-looking woman named Rosa, with gray streaking through her black hair and permanent coffee stains on her apron, took one look at me and said, "You running from something?" Her voice wasn't judgmental, just matter of fact, like she had seen this story 100 times before. I could have lied. I could have made up some story about moving to town for school or work or a fresh start. But I was so tired of lying, of pretending, of acting like everything was fine. So I just nodded, unable to speak around the lump in my throat. Rosa studied me for a long moment, then sighed the sigh of someone who had been exactly where I was standing. "Okay," she said, $6 an hour plus tips. Morning shift, 5 to 1. You'll make coffee, take orders, clean tables, and wash dishes. It's hard work and the customers can be assholes, but the money's regular and I pay in cash if you need it. Start tomorrow. Don't be late." I almost cried with relief. "Thank you," I managed to whisper. "Thank you so much." Rosa waved me off, already turning back to the espresso machine. "Don't thank me yet. Wait until you've dealt with the 7 a.m. rush. You might regret this." I didn't regret it. The work was hard, my feet ached from standing all day, and some customers were indeed assholes. But it was honest work. I earned that money with my own hands, and no one could take it away from me or tell me I didn't deserve it. For the first time in my life, I had value that didn't depend on how well I cleaned a bathroom or how quietly I made myself. That's where I met Daniel. He worked the afternoon shift, and we overlapped for an hour each day during the transition. Daniel was 22, studying part-time at community college, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and an easy smile that never felt fake or forced. He had dark hair that always looked like he had just rolled out of bed and a habit of humming under his breath while he worked. He was the first person in years who talked to me like I was a real person, not a burden or a servant or something to be tolerated. He asked about my day, actually listened to my answers, laughed at my jokes even when they weren't funny. He shared his lunch when I forgot to bring money for food, waving off my protests and insisting he had packed too much anyway. He taught me the secret to dealing with difficult customers. Smile and nod and forget about them the second they walk out the door. And he never asked prying questions about why I was living in a room above a laundromat at 19. After 2 weeks of working together, he asked why I was so jumpy, why I flinched whenever someone raised their voice or moved too quickly near me. We were closing up the shop, wiping down tables and stacking chairs, and a customer had yelled at me earlier for getting his order wrong. I had apologized profusely, remade his drink twice, given him a refund, and still he had called me an idiot before storming out. Daniel had seen the way my hands shook for 20 minutes after, the way I kept glancing at the door like the man might come back. "I'm fine," I said automatically, the response I had perfected over 12 years of pretending everything was okay. "No, you're not," Daniel said gently, "and that's okay. You don't have to tell me anything, but if you want to talk, I'm a pretty good listener." Something about the way he said it, without pressure or judgment, just a simple offer of kindness, broke through my defenses. We sat down at one of the tables, and I told him everything. It poured out of me like water from a broken dam, 12 years of abuse and isolation and being told I was worthless. I told him about Vivian and the lavender dress, about Richard and the cleaning and the constant criticism, about Aunt Carol and the lies that drove her away. I told him about leaving at 4 a.m. with everything I owned in a backpack, about the fear that still woke me up at night that somehow they would find me and drag me back. I expected him to make excuses for them, to tell me I must have misunderstood, that parents sometimes have a tough love approach, that I should try to see things from their perspective. Every adult in my life had dismissed my pain, minimized my experiences, told me I was being dramatic or too sensitive. I braced myself for more of the same. Instead, Daniel looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, "That's not love, Ellie. That's abuse. And you're so brave for getting out." It was the first time anyone had ever called me brave. I had felt like a coward for running away, for not standing up to them, for taking 12 years to finally leave. But Daniel saw it differently. He saw courage in survival, strength in escape, bravery in choosing myself for the first time in my life. I cried for the second time since leaving, but these tears felt different. They weren't tears of shame or fear or hopelessness. They were tears of relief, of release, of something that felt almost like healing. And Daniel sat with me through all of it, passing me napkins from the dispenser and not saying a word, just being present in a way no one ever had before. After that night, we became real friends. Daniel started bringing me groceries, claiming his mom always bought too much and things would go bad if someone didn't eat them. He drove me to job interviews when they were too far to walk. He introduced me to his sister Anna, who worked at a bookstore owned by a man named Mr. Henderson. "He's always looking for reliable people," Daniel said. "And he pays better than Rosa. Not that Rosa isn't great, but you deserve better than $6 an hour." I interviewed with Mr. Henderson the following week, my heart hammering the entire bus ride there. Henderson's Books was located on Main Street, sandwiched between a bakery and an antique shop. The front windows were piled with books, some so old they looked like they might crumble if you touched them. A bell chimed when I pushed open the door, and the smell hit me immediately. Old paper and leather and vanilla candles burning on the counter. Mr. Henderson was in his 60s, with white hair that stuck up in odd angles like he had been running his hands through it, and reading glasses perpetually perched on his nose. He wore a cardigan with elbow patches and had ink stains on his fingers. He looked up from the book he was cataloging and smiled at me, a real smile that reached his eyes and made them crinkle at the corners. "You must be, Ellie," he said. "Daniel's told me a lot about you. Says you're a hard worker and you need a fresh start." I nodded, tongue-tied and terrified. I would say something wrong and lose this opportunity. "Why do you want to work here?" he asked me, setting down his book and giving me his full attention. I could have lied again, could have said something about loving books or needing employment or being good with customers, but Daniel had seen the truth and hadn't flinched, and something made me think, Mr. Henderson would appreciate honesty too, because I've never been allowed to just read before, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, and I think I'd like to try. Mr. Henderson studied me for a long moment, his eyes sharp and assessing, but not unkind. Then he smiled again, this time with a sadness that suggested he understood more than I had said. "You're hired. $8 an hour to start, 10 after 3 months if you work out. You'll shelve books, help customers, handle the register, and keep the place tidy. And on slow days, you're welcome to read anything in the store. I've always believed books should be read, not just sold." I almost cried right there in the middle of his shop. Instead, I nodded rapidly and managed to choke out a thank you that encompassed so much more than just the job. Mr. Henderson became more than just a boss. He was the first adult in my life who treated me with respect, who valued my opinion, who seemed to genuinely care about my well-being. He recommended books, starting me with simple ones and gradually working up to more complex literature. He taught me about authors and literary movements, about the history of printing and the beauty of a well-crafted sentence. He encouraged me to take my time exploring the store when it was slow, to pull books off shelves and lose myself in their pages. He noticed when I looked hungry and always had an extra sandwich from the deli next door, always claimed his wife had packed him too much for lunch and he couldn't possibly eat it all. He never asked invasive questions about my past, but he made it clear his door was always open if I needed to talk. Some days, sitting in his warm bookstore with a cup of tea and a novel, he felt like the father I should have had, the one I had lost when Richard stopped pretending to care. 3 months into my new life, I was starting to feel like maybe things would be okay. I had 2 jobs that paid enough to cover my rent and food. I had friends, real friends who cared about me without expecting anything in return. I was reading books that challenged me and changed me and made me think about the world in new ways. I was healing, slowly but surely, from 12 years of systematic destruction of my self-worth. Then Daniel found me during my shift at the bookstore, his face pale and worried. "Someone's been asking about you," he said without preamble. "A woman came into the daily grind this morning asking Rosa if she knew an Ellie who used to live in Westbrook. Rosa didn't say anything, but she told me about it and I thought you should know." My heart dropped into my stomach. Vivian had found me. Of course she had. She couldn't stand the thought of me being happy, of me surviving without them. I was ready to run again, to pack my few belongings and disappear to another town, another state, somewhere they could never find me. My hands started shaking and I could feel a panic attack building in my chest, my breath coming in short gasps. Daniel grabbed my shoulders, forcing me to look at him. "Wait," he said firmly. "Let's at least find out who it is before you panic. It might not be Vivian." He had gotten a name from Rosa, who had asked for identification before she would even confirm that someone named Ellie worked there. Carol Winters, Aunt Carol, my mother's sister. The one Vivian had driven away with lies. The one I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. My hands shook for a different reason now, as Daniel helped me dial the number Rosa had written down. The phone rang 3 times, each ring feeling like an eternity, before a voice I barely remembered answered. "Hello? Aunt Carol?" My voice cracked, broke completely on her name. "It's Ellie." The sound she made was somewhere between a sob and a gasp, a noise of pure emotion that said everything about how she had felt about losing me. "Oh my God, Ellie! Baby, where are you? Are you safe? I've been looking for you for months. Ever since I heard you left Richard and Vivian, I've been trying to find you." "How did you know I left?" I asked, sinking down onto the floor behind the counter, my legs suddenly unable to hold me up. "Richard's brother told me," she said, talking fast like she was afraid I would hang up. "We ran into each other at a grocery store about 6 months ago. He made some comment about how Richard was finally free of responsibilities now that you had run off. I couldn't believe it. I went to the house, confronted them. They told me you were 18, that you had left and they didn't know where you were and they didn't care. Vivian said some horrible things, Ellie. Things about you that I knew couldn't be true. And I realized I had been lied to for years. We met at a diner the next day, a neutral location where I felt safe enough to see her without fear of Vivian and Richard showing up. I got there early, too anxious to wait, and sat in a corner booth where I could see the door. When Aunt Carol walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked older than I remembered, with gray streaking through her dark hair and lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. But her eyes were the same warm brown as my mother's, and when she saw me, her whole face crumpled. She crossed the diner in quick strides and pulled me into a hug that lasted a full minute, maybe more. She smelled like vanilla and coffee and something else, something that reminded me of my mother, of safety, of home. I buried my face in her shoulder and let myself be held, something I hadn't allowed in so long I had forgotten what it felt like. We sat across from each other in that cracked vinyl booth, and she held my hands across the table while I told her everything. Every detail of the abuse, the isolation, the emotional torture Richard and Vivian had put me through. I told her about the lavender dress and the perfume and Vivian's rage. I told her about the years of being told I was worthless, about being worked like a servant in my own home. I told her about leaving at 4 a.m. and living above a laundromat and being terrified every single day that they would find me and drag me back. Aunt Carol cried through most of it, tears streaming down her face unchecked. "I tried to reach you," she said, when I finally ran out of words. "For years, I tried. But Vivian told me you hated me, that you blamed me for not taking you in when your mom died. She said you had told her terrible things, that you called me a coward and a failure. She said seeing me would only upset you, that you were working through your grief with a therapist and needed space from reminders of your mother." "There was no therapist," I said bitterly. "There was never a therapist. They just wanted me isolated." "I believed her because I did blame myself," Aunt Carol continued, her voice thick with tears. "I should have fought harder for you. When your mother died, I wanted to take you in so badly. But I was in the middle of a divorce, Ellie. My husband had cleaned out our bank accounts and left me with 2 kids under 5 and no job. I was living in a 2-bedroom apartment, barely making rent, working 2 jobs just to put food on the table. Richard had money, stability, a big house. He convinced me you'd be better off with him, that you deserved better than the poverty I could offer." She squeezed my hands tighter, her voice breaking. "So I stepped back. I told myself it was for your own good, that you'd have opportunities with Richard that I couldn't give you. And then Vivian told me you hated me, and I thought I deserved that. I thought it was my punishment for not fighting harder, for not being strong enough to take care of you. So I stopped calling. I stopped sending birthday cards. I let you go, and I've regretted it every single day for the last 10 years. She lied about me too," I said, needing her to understand the full scope of what Vivian and Richard had done. "Told people I was troubled, that I made up stories for attention. She isolated me from everyone who might have helped me." Aunt Carol nodded slowly, her jaw clenched with anger I had never seen on her before. "I heard things over the years. People Richard and Vivian knew would mention you in passing at church or the grocery store, always with this tone like you were some problem child. They'd say things like, 'Poor Richard, stuck raising such a difficult girl,' or 'Vivian is a saint for putting up with that troubled stepdaughter.' I wondered sometimes if they were lying, but I didn't trust my own judgment anymore. I had already failed you once. I wasn't sure I could trust myself to see the truth." She reached up and brushed my hair back from my face, a gesture so tender it made me want to cry all over again. "I'm here now," she said firmly, "and I'm not going anywhere. I'm not letting them hurt you anymore. I'm not letting anyone hurt you anymore." For the first time since my mother died, I felt like I had family again. Real family, the kind that shows up and stays and fights for you. Aunt Carol became a constant presence in my life after that day. She helped me find a better apartment, a 1-bedroom in a safer neighborhood with actual heat and a bathroom that didn't require I call the landlord every time something broke. She took me shopping for real clothes, not hand-me-downs or clearance rack items, but actual nice clothes that fit properly and made me feel like a person worth dressing. She cried when I tried on a sundress and smiled at my reflection, told her it looked nice. "You look so much like your mother," she said, wiping at her eyes. "She would be so proud of the woman you're becoming." Aunt Carol introduced me to her new partner, Marie, a quiet woman with kind eyes who worked as a social worker and understood trauma in ways most people didn't. Marie had seen cases like mine before, had worked with kids who had been abused and neglected by the people who were supposed to protect them. She didn't push me to talk, didn't ask invasive questions, but she gave me resources, phone numbers for therapists who worked on sliding scales, information about support groups for adult survivors of childhood abuse. Together, Aunt Carol and Marie created a safety net I had never known I needed. They invited me to dinner every Thursday. They remembered my birthday and actually celebrated it, with cake and presents, and people who were genuinely happy I existed. They checked in on me regularly, not in a suffocating way, but in a way that made me feel seen, valued, important. They were building the family I should have had all along, and I was finally learning what it felt like to be loved without conditions. Life was getting better. I was healing, slowly but surely. Mr. Henderson had given me a raise after 3 months, just like he promised, and was teaching me about the business side of running a bookstore. I had started taking classes at the community college, just one at night while I worked, but it was a start. Daniel and I had started dating, tentatively at first because I was so afraid of messing it up, but he was patient with me, understanding about my past, careful never to push me further than I was ready to go. I felt like a real person for the first time in my life. I had goals, dreams, plans for a future that didn't involve cleaning someone else's house or walking on eggshells or being told I was worthless. I was happy, genuinely happy, in ways I probably couldn't even have imagined a year before. Then 6 months after leaving, I got the text message that changed everything. Unknown number. My stomach dropped even before I read it. Some instinct telling me this was bad. "We know what you're planning, Ellie. Come back home and we'll forget this ever happened. Or everyone will know what you really are." I stared at those words until they blurred, my blood running cold. I was at Aunt Carol's apartment, having dinner like we did every Thursday. Marie was in the kitchen making her famous lasagna. Daniel was on the couch next to me, and he must have felt me tense because he looked over and saw my face. "What's wrong?" I couldn't speak. I just handed him my phone with shaking hands. He read the message twice, his expression darkening. "How did they even get your new number?" I had changed my number 2 months after leaving, had been so careful about who I gave it to. But Richard had connections, money, resources I couldn't hope to match. Of course he had found me. I had been naive to think I could just disappear, that they would let me go that easily. Vivian couldn't stand the thought of me being happy, of me surviving without them. She needed to control me, to make me small again, to pull me back into that house and break me down until there was nothing left. Aunt Carol came out of the kitchen, took one look at my face, and demanded to know what had happened. I showed her the text, and her expression went from concerned to furious in the space of a heartbeat. Marie read it over her shoulder, her professional mask slipping to reveal genuine anger. "What do they think you're planning?" Marie asked gently, sitting down on my other side. "Nothing," I said, my voice small and scared, the voice of the girl I used to be. "I haven't done anything. I just left." But even as I said it, I realized that was enough. To them, my happiness was an act of rebellion. My survival was a threat to the narrative they had built about me being weak and worthless and dependent on them. They wanted me back under their control, or they wanted to destroy any chance I had at a normal life. There was no third option. "We need to call the police," Daniel said immediately, his voice hard in a way I had never heard before. "And tell them what?" I asked bitterly, the practicality of the situation cutting through my fear. "That my stepmother sent me a vaguely threatening text? They'll say it's a family matter. They'll tell me to block the number and move on. Unless she makes an actual threat of violence, there's nothing they can do." "Then we document everything," Marie said, slipping into social worker mode. "Keep the text. Don't delete it. If she sends more, keep those too. Start building a record in case this escalates." But Aunt Carol had been quiet through this whole exchange, her face thoughtful in a way that made me nervous. Now she spoke up, her voice careful and measured. "What if we had more than just this text? What if we had proof of what they did to you? What they've been doing for years?" "What do you mean?" I asked. That's when she told me about the box. After I had disappeared and she had finally tracked me down, Aunt Carol had started digging into Richard and Vivian's finances. It had started as curiosity, a nagging feeling that something wasn't right about the whole situation. She had asked Marie, who had a friend who worked in banking, to look into some things. What they found was damning. Money that was supposed to be held in trust for me, money from my mother's life insurance and estate, had been redirected into accounts under Richard and Vivian's names. My mother had been smart, had known Richard would remarry eventually, and had set up a substantial trust fund to ensure I would be taken care of no matter what. The fund was supposed to be untouchable until I turned 21, with a trustee managing it until then. Richard was the trustee. He had been stealing from the trust for years, taking money that was legally mine and using it to fund his and Vivian's lifestyle. Every luxury vacation, every designer dress, every expensive car, had been bought with money my dead mother had set aside for my education and care. I have bank statements. Aunt Carol said, pulling out a folder she had brought with her. I have emails where Vivian and Richard discussed how to hide the money, how to make it look legitimate. I have documentation of the trust fund your mother set up, the terms of it, and proof that Richard has been violating those terms for over a decade. Financial exploitation is a crime, Ellie. Especially when it involves money held in trust for a minor. I felt something shift inside me, anger replacing the fear that had consumed me moments before. They hadn't just abused me emotionally and psychologically. They hadn't just isolated me and broken me down and convinced me I was worthless. They had stolen from me. They had stolen from my dead mother who had wanted to provide for me even after she was gone. Every nice thing they owned, every indulgence they had enjoyed, had been bought with money that should have gone toward my future. I want to record them, I said suddenly, the words coming out before I had fully formed the thought. I want to get them to admit what they did. Daniel and Carol exchanged looks. That could be dangerous, Daniel said carefully. If they realize what you're doing. They won't, I interrupted. They think I'm weak. They think I'm still that scared little girl they could push around. They won't see me coming. Over the next 2 weeks, we planned meticulously. I started calling Vivian and Richard's house from my old phone number, the one I hadn't blocked them on. I left voicemails asking to talk, saying I wanted to work things out, that I missed them and wanted to come home. It physically hurt to say those words, to put that pleading tone in my voice, to pretend to be the broken girl they wanted me to be. Vivian called back after 3 days, her voice dripping with fake concern that made my skin crawl. Oh, Ellie, we've been so worried about you. Of course we can talk. You're always welcome home, sweetheart. This is your home, and we're your family. The lies came so easily to her, so naturally. I recorded every conversation, every text message. I played my part perfectly, the prodigal daughter returning home with her tail between her legs. I let them think they had won, that they had broken me completely, that I was crawling back because I couldn't survive without them. In one particularly damning phone call, I got Richard to admit that he had redirected some of my mother's money for household expenses while I was growing up. You were living under our roof, eating our food, using our electricity, he said matter-of-factly, like he was explaining basic economics to a child. Someone had to pay for all that. It's only fair we recouped some of those costs from the trust. Your mother would have understood that. She was a practical woman. Money that was legally mine. Money meant specifically for my care and education, protected by law and trust documents my mother had paid lawyers to draft. He said it so casually, with such complete confidence in his right to take it, like stealing from a child was just good financial planning. The day before I planned to confront them in person, Vivian sent another text, this one more revealing of their true intentions. If you don't come home by Friday, we're filing a police report saying you stole from us. We have witnesses who will confirm you took jewelry and cash before you left. Don't test us, Ellie. You won't like how this plays out. More lies. I had taken nothing but what was mine, one ring that had belonged to my mother and the few dollars I had earned. But I knew they could make it believable. They had spent years building a narrative about me being troubled and ungrateful. They had friends, connections, money. They could hire lawyers and pay people to lie for them. They could paint me as the troubled runaway daughter who stole from her generous parents and who would believe my word against theirs. I showed the text to Aunt Carol and Marie. They're getting desperate, Marie said, her professional assessment cutting through my panic. That's good. Desperate people make mistakes. They're also more dangerous when they're desperate. Aunt Carol countered, her face tight with worry. Which is why we do this now, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. Before they have time to build their case against me, before they can poison more people against me. Friday morning arrived gray and rainy, the kind of weather that felt like an omen. I drove to my old house with Daniel and Aunt Carol, my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel the entire way. They waited in the car at the end of the driveway, ready to call the police if I wasn't out in 15 minutes. I had my phone recording in my jacket pocket, a backup recorder in my other pocket in case the first one failed, and a script in my head of exactly what I needed them to admit. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely ring the doorbell, but I forced myself to press it. The sound echoed through the house, that same chime I had heard 10,000 times before, and I had to fight the urge to turn around and run back to the car. But I had to do this. For me, for my mother, for every other person trapped in a situation like mine who thought there was no way out. Vivian opened the door, and for a split second, I saw genuine surprise on her face before she arranged it into a smile. Ellie, she said warmly, like we were old friends, like she hadn't sent me that threatening text just days before. "Come in, sweetheart. We've missed you so much." The words were right, but her eyes were wrong, cold and calculating, even as her mouth smiled. I stepped into the house, and the smell hit me immediately. That expensive perfume and furniture polish and something else. Something that smelled like my childhood, like fear and pain and helplessness. The house looked exactly the same, like I had never left, like time had stopped the moment I walked out that door 6 months ago. Richard was in the living room, sitting in his leather recliner like a king on a throne, exactly where I knew he would be. He didn't get up, didn't even set down his newspaper. "Well," he said, his voice dry and dismissive, "look who finally came to her senses." I stood in the center of the room, the same room where I had served them countless meals, cleaned countless messes, endured countless criticisms. It looked smaller than I remembered, less imposing. They looked smaller too. Vivian's smile was too tight, showing too much gum, her face stretched and unnatural from too much Botox and too many fillers. Richard's eyes were cold and calculating, already planning his next move, already figuring out how to bend me back into shape. I had been terrified of these people for so long, had let them convince me I was nothing without them, that I should be grateful they even let me breathe their air. But standing there in that house, having survived 6 months without them, having built a life and found people who actually cared about me, I felt something new. Power. They didn't look like giants anymore. They looked like sad, petty people who needed to control others to feel important. "I came to tell you I know what you did," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, stronger than I had ever been in this house. "I know about the trust fund. I know you stole my mother's money." Vivian's smile vanished like someone had flipped a switch. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she said, but her voice had lost that syrupy sweetness, replaced by something sharp and defensive. "Yes, you do," I said, taking a step forward instead of backing away like the old Ellie would have done. "I have bank statements. I have emails between you and Richard discussing how to hide the money. I have recordings of our conversations where you both admitted to using my trust fund for yourselves. Every vacation you took, every car you bought, every designer dress in your closet was bought with money my mother left for me." Richard stood up then, his face darkening, his body language shifting from dismissive to threatening. "You recorded us? That's illegal. Anything you recorded can't be used in court. We'll have you arrested for wiretapping." "Actually, it's not illegal," I said calmly, even though my heart was racing so fast I thought it might explode. I had checked with Marie's lawyer friend, had made sure I knew the law before I did anything. Single-party consent in this state means as long as I was part of the conversation, I could record it. And even if it couldn't be used in criminal court, which it can, it would be admissible in civil court when I sue you for the money you stole. Vivian laughed, but it sounded desperate, unhinged. "No one will believe you. You're a troubled girl with a history of lying. We'll tell them you're mentally unstable, that you're making up stories for attention. We've been laying that groundwork for years, Ellie. We've told everyone what you are." "I know you have," I said, my voice hard. "But I have Aunt Carol now. She's been documenting everything since she found out I left. She has proof of the financial theft. And she has connections, people who will listen, people who know the truth about you. So here's what's going to happen." I pulled out my phone, swiped to the document Marie's lawyer friend had drafted, and held it up so they could see. "You're going to transfer every cent you stole from my mother's trust fund back into an account in my name, and you're going to do it by the end of the month. All of it, Richard. Every vacation, every car payment, every shopping spree. I want it all back with interest." "Or what?" Richard challenged, taking another step toward me. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, and I saw the rage building in his face, the same rage I had seen so many times before. But I wasn't a child anymore, and I wasn't alone. "Or I go to the police with everything I have," I said, standing my ground even though every instinct screamed at me to run. "The recordings, the bank statements, the emails, all of it. And then I go to the media. Your friends at the country club, Vivian. Your business partners, Richard. Your church community, your social circle, everyone you've worked so hard to impress. I'll tell them everything. How you abused and stole from a grieving child for over a decade. How you drove away anyone who tried to help me. How you used my dead mother's money to fund your lifestyle while treating me like a servant in my own home. How you're not the generous people taking care of a troubled stepdaughter, but thieves who stole from a child." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see them calculating, trying to figure out if I was bluffing, if the weak little girl they had molded was actually capable of following through. Vivian moved first, her hand shooting out to grab my arm just like she had done with the lavender dress, that same possessive grip meant to control and hurt. But I was ready this time. I stepped back quickly, pulling my phone out of my jacket and holding it up. "Don't touch me," I said clearly, loudly enough that the recording would catch every word. "I'm recording right now. Vivian just tried to grab me and I'm afraid for my safety. Daniel and Aunt Carol are right outside. If I don't walk out of here in the next 3 minutes, they're calling 911 and telling them I'm being held against my will." Vivian's hand dropped like I had burned her. She looked at Richard, something passing between them. Fear, maybe. Or just the realization that they had finally pushed too far, that their victim had grown teeth, that the game they had been playing for 12 years was over. "Fine," Richard said through a clenched jaw, his face red with barely contained rage. "We'll transfer the money, but after that, we never want to see you again. You're dead to us, Ellie. Dead. Don't ever contact us, don't ever use our name, don't ever pretend like you were part of this family." "That's the best offer you've made me in 12 years, I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. I turned and walked out of that house for what I knew would be the last time, my legs shaking so badly I barely made it to the car before they gave out completely. Daniel caught me as I stumbled off the porch, and Aunt Carol was out of the car in seconds, wrapping both of us in a fierce hug. I was crying, but for the first time, they were tears of relief, of release, of something that felt almost like joy. "You did it," Daniel whispered against my hair. "You actually did it." "We did it," I corrected, because I hadn't done this alone. I had help, support, people who believed in me and fought for me. I had never had that before, and it made all the difference. 2 weeks later, exactly $347,000 appeared in a new bank account. Aunt Carol's lawyer had set up for me. The number took my breath away. It was more than I had imagined, more than I had dared hope for. My mother had wanted to provide for me, had made sure I would be taken care of even after she was gone, and Richard and Vivian had stolen it all. According to the lawyer, some money had been spent over the years and would be harder to recover without a lengthy legal battle that could cost more than we would get back. But this was enough. Enough to finish my education, to truly start over, to build the life my mother had wanted for me. Enough to make them hurt financially the way they had hurt me emotionally. Not enough to ruin them completely, but enough to sting, to make them think twice about what they had done. The police did get involved eventually. With the evidence Aunt Carol and I provided, along with the recordings and bank statements, they opened an investigation into financial exploitation and child abuse. Vivian and Richard weren't arrested. The lawyer said it would be difficult to prove criminal intent beyond a reasonable doubt given that Richard had technically been the trustee, but they were publicly shamed when the local news picked up the story. The headline read, "Local businessman accused of stealing from stepdaughter's trust fund." The article detailed everything: the trust my mother had set up, Richard's role as trustee, the money that had been funneled into personal accounts, my allegations of emotional abuse and neglect. Vivian's name was mentioned prominently, her history of luxury purchases funded by my trust detailed with receipts and bank statements. Their friends at the country club suddenly stopped returning calls. Richard's business partners started distancing themselves, worried about being associated with someone accused of stealing from a child. Vivian's social circle evaporated overnight, the same women who had shared cocktails and gossip with her, now avoiding her calls and canceling lunch dates. They had built their entire lives on appearances, on being the perfect couple, the successful businessman and his beautiful wife, and I had torn that illusion apart with nothing but the truth. I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. The aftermath was messy in ways I hadn't anticipated. Some people believed Richard and Vivian's version of events, that I was a troubled girl making up stories for attention and money. But more people believed me, especially after they saw the evidence, the documentation that couldn't be faked or explained away. The truth has a weight to it that lies can never match. 6 months after that confrontation, Mr. Henderson called me into his office at the bookstore. I went nervously, worried I had done something wrong, but he just smiled that gentle smile and told me he was retiring. He was 72. His wife wanted to move to Florida to be near their grandchildren, and he was ready to slow down. "I want you to buy the store," he said without preamble. I laughed, thinking it was a joke. "Mr. Henderson, I'm 20 years old. I don't have that kind of money." "Actually," he said. You do now. And more importantly, you have the heart for it. This store needs someone who loves books, who understands that they're not just products but portals to other worlds, other lives. You're that person, Ellie. I've been watching you for the past year, and I see the way you talk to customers about books, the way you light up when you find exactly the right story for someone. This store should be yours. We worked out a deal with the lawyer. I bought Henderson's books with money from my trust fund, the money my mother had left me to build a future. I renamed it Phoenix Books, because like the mythical bird, I had risen from ashes, had been reborn into something stronger and better than I had been before. Daniel helped me renovate over the next few months, painting walls a soft cream color and building new shelves for the expanding inventory. Aunt Carol and Marie hosted a grand reopening party, inviting everyone we knew. People from all over town came, people who had heard my story through the grapevine and wanted to support me. Some of them were survivors too, people who had escaped toxic families or abusive relationships, people who understood what it meant to rebuild your life from nothing. They shared their own stories with me that night, and I realized I wasn't alone. I had never been alone. There were so many of us, and we were all fighting to be seen, to be heard, to matter. We were all proof that survival was possible, that happiness after trauma was real, that you could build something beautiful from the ruins of what came before. On the anniversary of the day I left Richard and Vivian's house, I stood in my bookstore at sunrise, watching the light pour through the front windows and illuminate the spines of hundreds of books. I had a cup of coffee in one hand and a new bottle of perfume in the other. Nothing expensive like Vivian's, just something light and clean from the drugstore that smelled like citrus and fresh laundry and hope. I sprayed a little on my wrist and smiled at the scent, at how different it was from that heavy floral perfume that had choked me a year ago. Daniel showed up a few minutes later with pastries from the bakery down the street. We had been dating for 8 months by then, taking it slow because I needed to learn how to be in a healthy relationship, how to trust someone not to hurt me, how to believe that I deserved kindness without having to earn it. He kissed my forehead, a gesture so gentle it still sometimes made me cry, and asked, "How are you feeling today?" "Free," I said, and it was the truest thing I had ever said. I feel free. Aunt Carol and Marie arrived an hour later, and we spent the morning in the bookstore, drinking coffee and eating pastries and talking about everything and nothing. These were my people now. This was my family. Not the one I was born into or forced to accept, but the one I had chosen. The one that chose me back. The one that showed up and stayed and fought for me and believed me and loved me without conditions. Sometimes I still get nightmares about that house. I wake up in the middle of the night, my heart racing, convinced I'm back there, back in that room, back under their control. I dream about Vivian's hands ripping the lavender dress, about Richard's cold eyes telling me I'm worthless, about being trapped and alone and helpless. But then I wake up in my own apartment, in a bed I bought with my own money, surrounded by books I chose because I wanted to read them. I wake up to text messages from people who actually care about me asking how I slept, making plans for breakfast or lunch, or just checking in because they wanted to hear my voice. I wake up to a life that's mine, built by my own hands, filled with people who see me as I am and love me anyway. That's the revenge that matters most, not the money I got back or the public shaming of Richard and Vivian, though those things felt good too. The real revenge is being happy, genuinely happy, living a life they told me I didn't deserve. They tried to make me blind to my own worth, tried to convince me I should be grateful for the crumbs they threw me, that I was nothing without them. But all they really did was teach me how to see in the dark, how to find light even in the deepest shadows, how to recognize real love when it finally appeared because I knew so intimately what false love looked like. And now that I can see clearly, I'm not afraid of what I find. I'm not afraid of being seen anymore either. To anyone listening who's still trapped in a situation like I was, who thinks they'll never get out, who believes the lies that toxic people tell about them, I want you to know something. You are worth more than their abuse. You deserve love, real love, not the conditional scraps they offer when you perform perfectly. You deserve to be treated with respect and dignity and basic human kindness. And you are strong enough to leave, even when it feels impossible, even when you can't see how you'll survive. You can survive this. You can build something beautiful from the ruins they left behind. You can be happy, genuinely happy, in ways you probably can't even imagine right now. But first, you have to choose yourself. You have to decide that you matter, that your well-being matters more than keeping the peace or maintaining appearances or holding on to people who will never see your worth no matter what you do. You have to accept that some people will never change, that you can't fix them or love them into being better, that the only person you can save is yourself. It won't be easy. There will be days when you doubt yourself, when you wonder if you made the right choice, when you miss the familiarity of even a toxic situation because at least you knew what to expect. But I promise you, the fear of the unknown is nothing compared to the slow death of staying somewhere you're not valued, somewhere you're constantly told you're not enough, somewhere you have to make yourself small just to exist without conflict. So, here's what I want to know from you. Have you ever had to make the impossible choice between your own survival and a relationship everyone expected you to maintain? Have you ever been made to feel small by someone who was supposed to lift you up? Drop a comment below and share your story, because I truly believe that speaking our truths is the first step toward healing. And if this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. You never know who might need to hear that they're not alone, that escape is possible, that there's a whole life waiting on the other side of that door. Your voice matters. Your story matters. You matter. Don't let anyone ever convince you otherwise.